Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin, eclectic album reviews and general musical meanderings. This week we're going to take a really close look at Peter Gabriel's I.O. Most recent album from Peter Gabriel, released in 2023, was a really big player for me last year. And as you all know, every year I organize my listing in this big bracket where I sift through and try to find out the best albums and have a really good objective way of coming up with my top 20 at the end of the year. And Peter Gabriel was a really big player in that in 2024. But there's an added complication with this album because he released two specific versions of it, the Bright Side Mix and the Dark Side Mix. And because I listen to the music the way that I do, I wanted to come up with the album. Like if I'm going to listen to Peter Gabriel's I.O., which is the one that I'll pull off the shelf and listen to. And so for half the year I listened to the Bright Side Mix and half the year I listened to the Dark Side Mix, and I kind of juggled all the options. Now at the same time I'm figuring out my top 20 over the course of the entire year, I have a publicly available top 20 bracket that I run for my viewers. And so figuring out which mix was going to be the ideal one for that group was a little bit trickier situation because, not everybody listens to music on that deep of a level, but still we want to come up with an idea about how to objectively pull it off. So when I.O. made it to the end of the year as one of the top 20 for the viewer's choice list, I created a little subcommittee amongst some of my members to try to figure out which one was the one we would pick to be the representative of I.O. over the course of last year. And the head of that committee was my good friend Dave Randolph, who is a musician and sound engineer that I've known for decades. We're old friends. And so at the end of last year, we sat down to talk a little bit about I.O., the Dark Side Mix versus the Light Side Mix. And not only did we talk about our subjective experiences with the album, what we thought about, what it sounded like, but also we applied some more scientific methods. We kind of looked at the physical manifestations of the recordings and the mixes and the production to try to maybe figure out what it was about these albums that we liked. We came up with some really, really interesting results, which we recorded and we'd like to share with you. So the rest of this video, and it's a little bit longer than normal, but I think that especially if you're a person who's into sound design and is into production, you'll find a lot of our discussions very interesting. So the first half is us kind of talking through the albums and what we thought of it just as listeners. Towards the end, we also took a little bit more of a scientific approach to the album to look at some of those elements. So Dave and I really hope you enjoy our discussion as it follows.
So my subjective opinion is that the Dark Side mixes appeal to me more on the balance, right?
Okay.
And I think that in general, just as a rule, I prefer to listen to things that are mixed darker.
Okay.
Right. I don't like things with a lot of hyped up treble in general. So like I'm immediately drawn to the Dark Side mixes because I'm like, oh, there's some gooey texture in there, and like the top end of the sound isn't trying to take my head off.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so subjectively, like after I had listened to both of them a while back, I was like, I just was more drawn to the Dark Side mixes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Now, is there a technical reason for me being drawn to them after all my science?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a mixed bag.
Mm-hmm.
If I A/B compare them, they're actually very different animals.
Yeah.
That was my conclusion. It wasn't just like, oh, this one's mixed a little different from this one. Like they are radically different mixes of the same material. If I just want to sit down and listen to it, I want to listen to the Dark Side mix because again, it's got that kind of like gooey, glued together sort of sound that's very appealing to me, and for reasons I don't even fully understand myself. But like you mentioned, if I'm gonna transcribe it, I'm gonna listen to the Bright Side mix.
Yeah.
Because like everything is in naked detail in that Bright Side mix. The Dark Side mix is more like the basic instrumentation and arrangement, I believe, is the same across both of them. There's probably some places that I haven't found where something was taken out, but it's my belief that they're both substantially the same instrumentation, but presented very different.
I like to have a definitive version. This is me, right?
Sure.
My personal thing. So if I'm going to pull the album off the shelf, what am I going to listen to? So for the first half of the year, I was listening to the Dark Side mix. And of course, the first time you listen to something, you connect to it, you're going to tend to gravitate towards that.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of natural, unless something really crazy happens with another thing that really draws your attention. So whenever I started listening to the Light Side mix this summer, I definitely noticed a lack of kind of impact, if you will.
Mhm.
You know,
Yes.
it felt thin in comparison.
That's that gooey lower mid-range thing that I'm talking about, like that really just anchors it as a listening experience,
Yeah.
right?
And
It's
like
some
that, you have several songs on there. I always the first one I really noticed it on was like on the court. That thing is a
yeah.
second too, where like the boom, boom, and he's singing those really like heavy sounds. Um, and it had a lot. It had a big. It felt like a big impact to me as I listened to it on the dark side mix. The light side just felt like it glossed over those things. I was like, well, what about the parts or parts of the arrangements that are different? But then I looked at the
You're
times.
there.
Yeah, it's all there. Like
Yeah.
the times were the exact same length. I didn't even realize that until literally like a week and a half ago. Until I started really looking at this. Overall, it's the same thing. But
Yeah,
that's
it's my belief, like I said, it's my belief that they are substantially the same pieces,
yeah.
put together very differently. Right.
Before I listened to them back to back, I would have argued that. But after doing it, I agree with you. But there's so much stuff on there that also I think is revealed in the light side mix in those mixes, as you say. There's string arrangements that are definitely not audible on the
Yeah.
on the original one. I would also, to a degree, make a general statement that the ballads I think on this Peter Gabriel album, the slow ones, are some of the more tedious tracks to a degree.
They're not
They're
my favorite.
Yeah, they're less so on the bright side mix.
Really.
I feel well because I think that there's more room for string arrangements and those kinds of things come through and fill in the blanks a little bit better. But the more powerful pieces, the more funky pieces, the more fully arranged pieces, I didn't like as much because I just felt like the power that you traded out for the dark side stuff was worth losing some of those bells and whistles.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
I could agree with that. I will say, like when I was really doing the critical listening assignment for this, I did not include any of the ballads in my analysis. So I haven't really done an A/B of the ballads to see like what, because I'm kind of like you, like they're not really my favorite things to listen to on this particular collection. So
Mhm.
so I
Right.
looked at IO, The Court, and Panopticon.
Yeah, those are great examples. Those are all like the most dynamic songs on the album.
Like the chords arrangement is so interesting to me. Like there's the big thing, then it just sort of stops, and the chord
Hmm.
will, and it's like this. It's a very interesting way to present I guess, your chorus,
Right,
right?
right,
It's
right. Sure.
how he
And,
did it, and so
and
I'm
right up
drawn to
front,
that kind of stuff.
right up front too. You're barely out of that first verse, and he starts in on that mantra. It's like a mantra
Yeah,
that shows up
yeah.
throughout
That's
that song.
that's exactly what it is. It is a mantra. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. It's like,
And that's
and
if and again, I've said throughout the year for folks, it would seem that for a guy that's a Peter Gabriel fan, this would be a shoe in for my album of the year. But of Peter Gabriel's albums, it's also kind of the one that I think is one of the more flawed ones of his works. If you
mhm,
look at his overall, body of work.
yeah,
But
yeah.
even again, Peter Gabriel's least effective work is better than 90%
Better than
of the people's
99.
best work.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like splitting hairs. It's a very
Right.
privileged space to talk about the flaws in Peter Gabriel's
It really
recordings.
is. It really is.
It's pretty silly. I also would argue that this album is probably the one that's had the least amount of this sort of world music interests in it
Yeah,
in a very long time.
yeah. Even though, like, I think the personnel on it is pretty close to what was the last? I've been drawing a blank. The last one.
Us or
Us. No. Up. Yeah. Like I really was a big fan of Up.
Up was a great album. And see, here's the thing: when I put on Up for the first time, the first song came on, had that really like explosive like beginning of the song. I forget what it was. It sounded like just almost like you're smashing glass, and his voice is very distorted. And I was like, "Is
Yeah.
this a Peter Gabriel album?
Yeah.
What the heck?" And I looked, "Oh yeah, it's good. It's the right disc." And so
Yeah.
like, I didn't have any moment like that on IO.
No, no. That it's a different animal. Like I feel like I almost feel like IO is sort of like in the arc of Peter Gabriel, like this is a it's a mellower album,
It
and
is.
it's I think it's more introspective too, and maybe that's why like there's not such a world element, because I think
Yeah.
the personnel are pretty much the same for the last two or three.
It
I
is,
mean,
but like when he was on Up again, he had that one track at the end. What was it? Signal to Noise that had Nusrat Ali Khan on it. That's just like
yeah,
that song is like
that's a good one. Oh,
that what screams out to the cosmos,
yeah.
you know. And there's just not a moment like that on IO so much.
He's more concerned about sort of his larger, what am I trying to say? His connection to humanity seems to
Yeah,
be kind of the theme, right? And
right.
I think he's more focused on how he feels about that, and maybe that, I don't know, maybe that informs why there's not as much world influence on it, is that he's
Yeah,
really sort of inward to see like,
yeah. I mean, he has on one of those ballads. I think the same one I was just mentioning. His name I can't recall. I will have to look it up. Where it's him just talking about being an older guy,
yeah, yeah,
just being an old guy and
yeah.
looking back on life. And I think that's one of the ways he actually can sell this album.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like he can't come out and do Games Without Frontiers at almost 80 years old. You
No,
know,
although he did when I saw him.
well, I mean, he
So
can do it. Don't get me wrong. He can sing it. But as far as having new material that has that same sort of,
yeah, no,
you know, it would sort of feel like he's posturing a little bit,
yeah,
and I don't.
yeah.
He's not doing that. He's being
No,
completely honest about where he's standing, which is respectable. You know what I mean?
yeah.
My daughter, she's funny. We've been listening to this, and she goes, "Dad, this sounds like the Tarzan soundtrack." And I was like, "Oh, it kind of does." But I'll also argue that the Tarzan soundtrack is Phil Collins' last great gasp.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, there are some good songs on there. There are.
yeah, yeah. I'm not that familiar with it, but it's interesting that she tied those two things together.
Well, especially, and I was like, you do realize that Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins, blah, 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 blah. And so then I don't know when the big 2 week tirade of showing her all the ways in which they were connected in the past. She's like, never mind, Dad. I didn't say anything. My bad. Forget it. So I like the album, and there's a lot of things that I like about the Bright Side mix. It's not, I can see why Peter Gabriel released them the way that he did. As
Mhm.
as frustrating it is to me, as a person that would like to have
Because you can't lock one. Yeah,
my
you can't.
definitive version of the album. The arguments for and against each one, I think, can be made. If you are a fan of Peter Gabriel from the 70s, you'll probably like the Bright Side mix better.
Yeah, yeah, because
Just because
like
of the production standards in the
the
70s kind of
production,
aligned themselves more with that sound.
yeah, and
But if you picked
like
them
a
up from
lot of,
if
well,
you
go
picked them
ahead.
up from So On, like you and I probably did, like we knew about him back then, but we really picked up on him through like Shock the Monkey at the very earliest, and then on from there.
Tony Levin playing way down there, and lots of low end fullness. Like
Right.
I know listening to early Genesis, I enjoy it, but it's a challenge for me to listen to it
You have to
sometimes.
hear through the production.
You have to hear through the production, and sometimes it's a little harsh sounding to
Yeah.
me.
Those
A lot
early
of it.
albums weren't produced super well. They never
They
had
were
like an they never had like an Eddie Offord.
no.
So let's talk science then.
Okay.
Talk to me about your findings about the differences between the two. I have a small, itty bitty bit of science that I can produce to hopefully maybe contribute to this
Okay.
aspect of it.
All right. Well, I'm gonna take you through. I'm gonna take you through the whole journey of how I went about trying to analyze this to see like what is different, and then we're gonna end up where I came out.
All right,
So
let's check it out.
so when we first started talking about this, so sort of the gold standard to find the difference between two pieces of audio is to flip one of them out of phase and play them together. And that's because, and here's your science lesson, sound waves do this, right? And so they go up and down. And so if they're both going up and down together, they're louder. But if one's going up, let's see if I can do this. If one's going up and one's going down, and you add them together, you get 0.
Right.
And so if you were to take a piece of audio and duplicate it and line it up perfectly and flip one side 180 degrees so that now the going up is now going down in the sound wave, right? You should get 0. Right. You should hear absolute silence. And so the sort of the gold standard to find the difference is to do it's called a null test. And so I thought, well, let's try a null test. That's maybe a good place to start. And I didn't get what I thought I was going to get.
Really?
It sounded different, but it wasn't what I thought. I thought I would get sort of weird, hollowed out sort of sounds, but that's not what happened. I got just sort of a thicker version. So then I really started thinking about it then, because at first I was just like, well, a null test is how you find out how things are different. And I was like, okay, it has to do with phase, right? So waves go up and down, and it's the phase is like, if it's at the top, it's at 90 degrees, and if it's at the bottom, it's at 180 degrees or whatever. And I got to thinking about it, and I was like, okay, if these were mixed in different places, different pieces of equipment shift the phase. Equalizers shift the phase. And so instead of light side and dark side sort of having, going generally the same and just being maybe tonally different, it may be that, they're really doing this. Like the waves are going up and down is maybe not the greatest explanation, but it's not something that I could just say, well, let's flip one side, cancel out everything, and here's the difference.
Right.
And I really got to thinking about it, and I was like, it makes a lot of sense that this null test is invalid. So then I decided that a subjective test was really the only way. Mm-hmm. So the way you set up a proper subjective test is you have to volume match. Right? You have to have perfect volume matching, because your ear will always hear a louder sound as being better, even if it's not, and or different, right? So fortunately, I have the way to do that here. And so what I did was I set up Pro Tools where I could A/B quickly and like instantly switch between light and dark. Mm-hmm. And then analyze it with a frequency analyzer as well, right? So that you can kind of see what the overall differences look like. And that's then when I was really able to pinpoint, like literally measure by measure, I could go through it and like, hit the buttons and flip flop it so that I'm listening to light and dark, with no delay, because it's right. It's that, oh, I've got to go switch from here to here. That's when your brain forgets. That's where you lose it. That's where you lose what that first one sounded like. But if you go instantly, it's like, oh, man, that is like clear as day.
Right.
Like I can really hear into it. And then you can look at the frequency analyzer. I mean, it's different, but it's not as radically different as you might think, which is another interesting thing. And another thing I found, like moment to moment, light side and dark side may not be, or bright side and dark side may not be brighter or darker as advertised.
Right.
I ran into a few cases where I'd flip it and I'd be like, oh, it's actually, dark side's actually brighter right now, this part of the song, right? So there was some interesting things that came out of that, but at the end, and maybe, maybe, I doubt Peter Gabriel really planned this out, but maybe he did, was like to force you to take a subjective look at it,
right,
to decide which one you actually like better. Mm-hmm. And I will say that, even after going through sort of all this subjectivity, or trying to be objective, like I was trying to see, okay, what's the objective difference? And I don't know that we can know that. Mm-hmm. At this point, right? But after doing all that subjectively, I still am gravitate toward the dark side mixes.
Right on. And I think too that, I mean, and me too. Even though I went round and round myself, trying to make sure, right, that this is really the one I like. I mean, okay, that's a rabbit hole. You can always find something.
Yeah.
But ultimately, when I get to the bright side mix, I miss the power of the dark side mixes.
Yeah.
You know, when I get to the dark side mix,
side.
What's that? Yeah.
The power of the dark side.
Right. And when I listen to dark side mixes, I do kind of miss some of the details, but not as much. You know.
See, I didn't even necessarily miss them because I feel like by and large they're in there. They're just presented so differently.
Yeah.
Like you might not get the low end of some instrument, but you get the really high frequency to remind you that it was in there in the dark side mix, right? Yeah. So it's like I never really felt like things are missing when I was going through all this. Mine was just more that things are really different.
The only thing that I did, my science-wise.
Yeah, tell me your science.
Okay, so after I was talking to you about it, I was thinking about spectrograms.
Right.
Because I've toyed with spectrograms on and off before. And so I did my own little A/B project here. Can you see this?
Yeah.
All right, so this, and hopefully you can hear it too. Let's see. And the chord will rise. Are you able to hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what I did was I took this phrase from both the dark side mix, the bright side mix, and the dark side mix. And kind of just looked at the differences between the two. So what you got to catch here, this is the bright side mix spectrogram, and this is the dark side mix spectrogram.
Okay.
Now, the scaling I didn't quite nail on the side, so you have to look at the numbers.
Okay.
But, you'll see that and these are, by the way, these are from wave files from a FLAC.
Okay.
A FLAC file.
Okay.
FLAC. So if you look here, it tops out at about 15, right? And when you get to MP3s, it usually doesn't go much past 20. This is what I've seen already. Okay.
Yeah.
But with the dark side mix versus the bright side mix, he takes us all the way up to 20. You can see it tops out there.
Fascinating.
At the 20. Right?
Okay.
So what's cool about this is that he's deliberately in the mix getting rid of that top end. There's virtually nothing over that reaches that 20,000 except for a few little things here at the end. So let's see if we can hear them both. You can hear the difference. The bright side mix is first, the dark side mix is second. And the chord will rise while the pillars unfold. All right, so here's the dark. And the chord will rise while the pillars unfold.
So here's a question I have.
All right.
Are we seeing, because this was what I started to run into, are we seeing artifacts of the FLAC compression here?
Well, that's a great question, because I don't normally do spectrograms with compressed files. Like if I'm doing serious research, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Right. This is all I've got. But what I can tell you is from my experience, that the biggest artifact that I can see is this. I don't know if you can see my cursor. This total dead stop at 20.
Yeah.
I mean, total dead stop at 20. Yeah. And then here, it looks like there's a dead stop around what? 16 or 17?
Yeah, they've lopped off half an octave up there.
But then look at the end here, towards the end, what's the 6.5, 7 seconds in?
Yeah.
They reach beyond that, and these are little, like, as you say, little bells and dings. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there's space available for those things to pop through if they want them.
Right.
The cursor you should be able to see on this, but you can't see it very well from the way I did this. Unfortunately, it didn't come through very well. But if you look, and the chord will rise while the pillars unfold. Okay, so you hear that, but that the ding ding at the end. That's kind of swallowed in the 6.5 to 7 second area,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But if you look at the second part here,
and the chord will rise while the billows unfold.
that little ding ding, that's
Yeah.
that.
Mm-hmm.
That's 7.5, and you can see those. That's super rich harmonics there. That is like very clearly like meant to do
It jumps right out.
the not stacked, not
Mm-hmm.
evenly spaced out harmonics that you see when you talk about like that metallic sound. The most glaring thing that I see is the very intentional chopping off of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Pitch-wise above that 15,000 hertz line.
Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm grabbing EQ curves right quick.
Okay.
And I'll share my screen. Well, here's what I was looking at. So I was looking at like what is the EQ curve of hold on, let me turn that off. So what's the EQ curve of right when we say the court will rise? So that's this little bit. Court
will rise while the billows unfold.
Okay, so that was the bright side.
Okay.
Right. So we can see, and I can put it into memory there, and then we can run it again for the dark side.
The chord will rise while the billows unfold.
Okay.
Different, but it's not that much different. Let me flip it again here. Actually, also let me turn off all these groups. So that was dark side. So bright side definitely peaks up a little bit more.
Yeah.
It's this top line here, and I can make this bigger for you here. So I mean, it peaks up a little bit more.
Yeah.
Notice the rest of the EQ curve is substantially similar.
Yeah, it's almost identical.
Yeah, and I found that across pretty much all of them. Like the EQ differences are actually pretty small because sort of in aggregate, like it's called the I'm drawing a blank on the word, Gestalt effect, right? Like I might make things sound darker, but something else sounds brighter and puts the harmonics back, but overall you like it. So I found that I mean, you know, there are differences in what the EQ curve looks like as you play these things, but they're not massive. This is maybe, what is this? We're going from 37. So, well, actually that one is pretty, right there is about, let's see, -40, -36. So that's only like 4 dB. Right.
Yeah.
That's not a huge difference.
Wow, but it makes it
enough. Right. At that point, it's enough that you perceive, and especially, and that's way up there too. Like a lot of people probably over, 50 probably can't even hear that up there.
Yeah. Yeah. Band director ears.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I would not have guessed that. I would have expected to see a lot bigger boost on the low end.
Yeah.
But it's more of a punch on the top end.
Well, here, let's do this. Let's analyze a part that's not the chord.
Okay, fair.
Right. So we'll start with bright side again.
We got the healer and the birthday cake. We got the real thing and we got the fake.
We got the healer and the birthday cake.
Okay.
So now we've got a lot flatter of a curve, right? We've cranked the bass up. So let's put that in memory, and let's do the same thing over here.
We got the healer and the birthday cake. We got the real thing and we got the fake.
So again, there's some differences, but they're not the major differences that you'd think they were.
Crazy. Wow, it makes a really big difference considering it's such a small change.
Yeah, right. Now, I've got another fun toy here. This is called Reference. I have put the 3 bright side mixes into Reference. All right, so I've got the Court. I've got the Court, I've got IO, and I've got Panopticon. So let's go to IO. And when I'm playing original, that's going to be dark. Okay.
Okay.
And when I flip this over to Reference, that's going to play it out of here on bright. And they're going to be perfectly time aligned and perfectly level matched, because that's what this tool does. And so this gives us a way then to instantly switch back and forth. Now down here at the bottom is, in fact, I'll just go ahead and start playing. So here it goes. This is IO play.
I stand on 2 legs.
So this curve down here is the EQ difference between the two.
Okay.
It's basically like, what do you have to do to get to the other one? You know, it's a lot, but it's not a lot.
It's not radical.
Right. So here's.
I'm just a part of everything.
Now, another interesting thing, you see these sort of faint outlines here?
Yeah.
So those faint outlines are the stereo width, and that's another difference I found. So when you have when one of them has a smaller one, it means that there's less stereo information.
Okay.
So there's a lot more stereo information in bright side.
I see.
See that?
I see what you're saying. Yes.
And that's frequency dependent. So that's like right in the mid-range, actually from mid-range all the way up. So they've got more side information in the mix.
I'm just a part of everything.
And the high end on this one is very much. We need a lot more high end to get to the reference, which is bright.
Well, and that bears out with the spectrogram that I was looking at.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Interesting.
But it's, a lot of the times though, it's not radically different. Let's move on up to where it kind of kicks in.
This is the Tarzan part for my daughter.
See, they're not too far off right through here.
Not at all. Mostly on the high end, but not by much.
Yeah, they're different, but again, they're not like radically different.
Wow.
Which I found really interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
So is it just that difference at the high end that you're hearing, or does it also have to do with the arrangements, do you think?
It has to do with the arrangements. It has to do with the sort of the stereo width. It's subtle differences. Let's check the last one. So this is bright. This is dark, and you'll notice all of a sudden dark had a lot more stereo information at the end.
Interesting, yeah.
So it's just sort of, like I said, they're very different animals.
Yeah.
And this is why my null test hypothesis failed. Was because they're so different that you can't just subtract one from the other and see what's left.
Right.
And I think that's the most interesting thing that I found doing all this was, just how radically different they are.
And it does give the albums again, a different feeling.
Yeah,
for sure. But the amount of difference that you're showing me does not reflect the difference in my subjective perception of the album.
Right. Let's look at Panopticon just so it doesn't go unnoticed.
Sure, fair.
We'll just kind of get a section in the middle here. Okay, so this is bright side has a lot more because that curve's going way up. That's the difference to get to reference. So it is mixed very differently.
Heavier in the
got
mids.
A lot less bass.
Yeah.
But it's got a lot more stereo information across the spectrum. Right? Because that faded area gets a lot bigger.
And that's the difference between the signal and the separate speakers.
Yeah.
So it's just to make sure I got it straight. Would that be fair to say that the dark side is more mono than
in some places?
Yeah. Okay.
That's the thing. They both ebb and flow.
Sure. Okay.
But they ebb and flow very differently. Like I think it was when we were looking at I/O toward the beginning, the bright side had more stereo information, but by the end, the dark side had more. Yeah. Right. Okay. And it's also you have to sort of look at where it falls in the frequency spectrum. I don't think I can make this any bigger, unfortunately, but the numbers down here, this is 20K. So if you look at, let's find I think this is a chorus. So that's radically different in the EQ there, right? Dark side has like no high and no low right through there. Wow. They've got it spread. The dark side has a lot more stereo information.
Interesting.
Want to show us what's going on. Panopticon.
Wow.
So how much is real?
They took the same ingredients and made two different cakes.
Seriously. Wow. Well, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, the differences are interesting, but again, it's the thing that I find is more interesting is how same they are.
Yep.
That's
what's fascinated me too, is like, they're not that different, but they're very, at the same time, they're very different.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting.
They're very different in minute ways.
Yes, in lots of minute ways.
That's interesting.
So if you look at them, like if you were in your car, I mean, you and I probably could, and probably most of the listening audience, but probably the average person wouldn't be able to tell the dark from the bright if they were traveling at highway speed in the average car.
Sure.
Right.
Right.
For a variety of reasons, but if you've got a good listening environment and or decent ears, like it's definitely a different experience but again, I vibed more with dark in general.
Yeah. And for the purposes of our grand project, album of the year project, I've deferred to your wisdom on that. And this particular post will be part of the argument for the dark mix.
Okay, cool.
So
what do you think the pushback on that will be?
Oh, probably not too radical. I think most people aren't going to care that much, to be honest.
Okay.
But to me, it's interesting, and I know to you it'd be interesting too. So that's why it's worth talking about for sure.
Yeah, this was a fun exercise.
Yeah, and if you post it, there's going to be other people around who want to know what the skinny is. Yeah. Certainly, you brought some pretty interesting information to bear there. That's surprising to me. I really thought you were going to come and show me like this radical boost in bass and all this other stuff for the dark side mix, but that's not the case at all.
It's not there until it is in tiny pockets. But
yeah, sure.
On the whole,
it also has to do with the sort of a balance and blend issue.
Yeah.
Where the things in the dark side mix are balanced and blended in more to make it a little more opaque.
Yeah.
In the bright
side, if I take the high end off, I don't have to raise the low end.
Right.
Or if I take the low end off, I don't have to raise the high end. And so you can, I can affect your perception of what it sounds like with some pretty subtle changes.
Right.
At the other end, instead of like cranking the bass way up, I can just roll off a little bit of and that's what your spectrogram, I think, really, really showed that aspect of it.
Right. Yeah. It's the absence of rather than, boosting the thing that you want.
Yeah.
Well, that's really super cool, man.
That's science.
Cool. That's the science. Thanks, Dave, for spending some time with me talking through this and also helping me work through some of the production aspects of this post. Your opinion and viewpoint is always valued, and I hope that everybody enjoyed getting what they could out of this. Really, the long and the short of it, especially on the scientific side, I thought was most interesting, was that production isn't always about what you boost, but also about what you take away. And we always think about more being better in life and in everything, but sometimes less is more. If you like this video, please like and subscribe and share it with your friends. Also, follow me over on Spotify. Of course, I have tracks up from I.O. from last year's list and also a current list from this year's listening. And if you want to be involved in this year's top 20, please sign up on my Patreon below. And until I see you next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.
The body stiffens, tires, and aches in its wrinkled, blotchy skin. With each decade, more camouflage for the wild-eyed child within.